All right, you should have a single sheet of paper on your desk, and just some things. We're talking about boundaries. In the process of talking about boundaries, if you look at the bottom, the bullet point all the way at the bottom above useful books to read, you will see boundaries and walls are for what? They're for protection without isolation. Okay? Boundaries and walls are for protection without isolation. At the exact center of you, down deep in your spirit, in your soul, there is a capacity to give and receive in relationship. Do we long for relationships? Do we grieve when they break? Yeah. Do we try to make more? Well, of course. And then we get so hurt that we start putting up walls, okay? But boundaries are not for walls, okay? I'm trying to emphasize that point. How important is it to have friends in your life? How important is it to have brothers and sisters in the faith who speak into your life and into whose life you speak? How important is it for you to be an important part of the body of Christ? How important is it? That's what he's saying. God's giving you a gift, and I'm expanding on this. And when you use that gift, when you utilize that gift, you bless other people and they bless you. And then the church becomes a body, a healthy body, okay, where we can all grow and we can all love each other. So then I put some additional material here. Trust and truth. Trust is closely related to truth. People who are known for being persons of truth are people who can be trusted. And that's something that I try desperately to do. Speak truth gently and with love, but speak truth and live truth. Live a life for which nobody can find fault. We'll all make mistakes, but live a life that's a life that's above reproach. That means you're not only speaking truth, you're also living truth. Trust is closely related to truth. In other words, if we're going to have trust in relationships, we have to have truth in relationships. If somebody's hiding the truth, trust is broken. If there's long-term hidden untruth, trust will be broken. When leaders hedge on truth or lean on politics, trust is broken. I was just reading an article this morning where trust in a large organization has been broken because the leaders were not people who can be trusted. So that broke the trust because they were not men of truth. People instinctively know that leaders cannot be trusted when they do not deal straightforwardly with the truth. It's true in your home. It's true in this classroom. If I'm a person who does not deal straightforwardly with truth, you will not trust me. I need to deal with truth. I need to deal with it in love. I need to deal with it graciously. I need to deal with it kindly, but it must be truth. So men, as we become leaders, as we become husbands, we become fathers, is so critical. And when people know that you are a person of truth, they will trust you. Most people would prefer a physician who would tell the truth about their illness rather than being untruthful. It's important to know the truth about a serious illness so it can be treated. So if you go to a doctor and you've got cancer and the physician says, well, maybe you have a bellyache, you don't want to hear that you have cancer, but you don't want to hear a lie about your problem either. So we need to deal with truth. And so many times you don't deal with truth, and eventually we get down the road in a church situation, in a school situation, on the mission field, in a family, and now what do? We've got to take all steps back to correct the lack of truth somewhere. Truth is also related to equity. Equity means treating people fairly. When leaders are equitable, when they treat people fairly, people know they can be trusted. So when leaders are equitable, when they will tell the truth, deal with truth, then the people will trust them. Okay? And in a home, for a father, in a business, on the mission, in a school. It's so important that we do, though. They know that equity will be meted out and fairness will rule the decisions. This provides security. When you know that whoever's in charge is going to do things fairly, and you know when you do wrong, you're going to be called for it. When you do right, you'll be blessed for it. All of a sudden, you develop trust. and you develop security. This provides security. It also provides fear of doing wrong and being caught. So if I know that the leaders are going to be people of equity, I know that if I do something wrong, somebody's going to be knocking on my door. That's pretty important. That's pretty important. That's very important. It makes people feel safe, and it makes them feel safe, but it also makes them safe. There's one thing about feeling and being, but it also does actually make them safe because they know that the leader will treat everyone with equity no matter their status. Do people get treated differently depending on their status? Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. It should not be true. Did Jesus do that? Did he care if they were scribes and Pharisees when he started passing out his woes? No. Did he care that somebody was a cast-off from society when he talked about blessing them? No. The woman at the well, Zacchaeus? No. He treated them with equity. Safety is also critically important. Leaders must be safe people. That is, they must be persons who have the best interests of the people at heart. When people know that they are safe in the hands of their leaders, a healthy society is formed. Lack of trust and lack of safety make an unhealthy culture. The message is clear. For a healthy culture, there needs to be a healthy, truthful, equitable, safe leaders who can be trusted. Until his kingdom comes on earth, eternally, we are to model his character. So part of that is having boundaries and walls. Got to make sure that those things are done well. We're not trying to build walls. We're trying to have boundaries instead of walls, is what I meant to say. We're trying to have boundaries. Boundaries are, I gave you two reasons for boundaries in the notes so far. One is to honor yourself, to honor and respect yourself, and to honor and respect other people. We can live in dependence, we can live in independence, or we can live in interdependence. Right? Dependence means that we're totally dependent on other people. And I don't always draw these circles in the same sequence, but if we live with walls around our life, then we're living as independent. Like, I don't need you, you don't need me, I'm going to live on my own, I'm tough and strong, and nobody can hurt me. And if we live as dependent, then we have like no boundaries around our life, and we're just constantly having people going through our lives, and we're going through other people's lives. But God wants us to live in an interdependence, where there's a shape and a definition to our lives, but at the same time, people can enter our life, and we can enter other people's lives. And so it's very important that I believe that's the way God intends us to live. So I want to take some time to look at specific illustrations of the TEMPS, the time, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual boundaries. Let's take a look on that page. Everybody see where we are? Okay, good. Temporal boundaries. We've already talked about these things a little bit. People who frequently interrupt your supper to ask a favor, or maybe disregard your break time or your day off. We've talked about that a little bit. We probably don't need to talk about it a lot more. But we want to be really careful that people are not constantly trying to take your time. They need to respect your time. And of course, we said real emergencies are accepted. In other words, if there's a real emergency, you need to go do something about it, and you need to do it now. I think we recognize that. But at the same time, if you're in a situation where time boundaries are being disregarded on a regular basis, you need to do something about it to protect yourself. And when you do that, many times people will honor you because they'll realize that you're a person who is not just going to disregard your time, but you're a person who's going to honor your time, you're going to respect yourself, you're also going to respect them. And in counseling, typically what I'll do, just as a practical illustration here with time, I'll typically set up maybe an hour to an hour and a half time with people. An hour may be just a little bit short. 2 hours, that's getting a little bit too long, okay? Typically. Not always, but typically. So let's say we plan for an hour. What I usually will do, we'll add a quarter hour to it, okay? So if there's somebody else coming, I don't say, well, you can be here from 7 to 8, and somebody's coming from 8 to 9, okay? That's not a good plan. Why? What if we get to 8 o'clock and, we have quite a bit to talk about yet, or maybe it's an uncomfortable place to stop. What you do is put a buffer in there, put a margin in there. So when you schedule your day so tightly, it doesn't have to be counseling, it can be almost anything. When you schedule your day so tightly with no margin, no buffers, after a while, people suffer from a lack of management, and you're not managing your time. So we need to manage our time, and it's a way of putting a boundary around your life. But it's a boundary that's flexible, okay? It's not a boundary that's so rigid that if somebody bumps it, it's going to break, okay? We want to make sure that the boundaries are there, but they're not so fragile and rigid that if we bump against them, we're going to break them. So we want to make sure that we guard our time. Next one, emotional boundaries. And here I use some of these illustrations. The classic one is the mom who says, "You don't want to wear that shirt," okay? Most men have heard this a few times along the way, or maybe their wives say that. So is it okay for mother or wife to say that? Well, sure, especially if you're 10 years old or if you're 14 years old. But if you're the husband or if you're a 20-year-old young man, then it's not really appropriate for a woman to say that to you. Why not? What if she wants to communicate that to you, ladies? If you want to communicate this to your brother, your husband, your son, what you might want to do is say, your green shirt would look better with those trousers, okay? Let me have a suggestion into your life, okay? Because when you say that, you're not attacking the person. When I say to you, or when I say to you, you don't want to wear that shirt, well, what did I just do? I crossed your emotional boundary because you apparently put it on for a reason. Okay, I should be looking at the gentleman here now. So you put it on for a reason. Maybe you like it. Maybe it's comfortable. Maybe it's the one you wanted. Or maybe you just don't even care, which is typically the case with many men, okay? and then somebody says to you, you don't want it. Well, we can do the same thing with, typically I see this with maybe a son who's getting a car, and dad will say, "You don't want that car." Well, maybe he does want that car, you see? So let's not say it quite like that. When you say it that way, you're crossing an emotional boundary. It is okay for you to say, and it's on your notes here, it's fine for a father to say, that car is not appropriate for a Christian to own and drive. That's fine. You make that statement, that's okay. It does not cross an emotional boundary. But when you tell your son he doesn't want the car, when he does want the car, we're bumping against emotions, okay? I want to be careful you're not respecting that person's emotions. Or maybe you say to your daughter, well, you don't want to wear that dress. Maybe she does. Is it okay for me to tell my daughter that dress is not appropriate? That is okay, okay? I have not attacked her emotional boundary. Is this making some level of sense to you? Okay, so when we talk, we want to be careful that we're dealing in facts, we're dealing in truth with gentleness and love, but we're not attacking the other person at the level of their emotions. All right, mental boundaries. Express the thoughts of your mind. We need to encourage the expression of thoughts at the same time without putting the person down. Many times you will hear somebody say, well, you should not be thinking that. Well, maybe they shouldn't be. But if they were and they were expressing it, we don't want to attack their mental boundary here. Why are you thinking something so foolish? You see, I've attacked your mental boundary. Now, if I say, where did you get that thought? Because that thought does not seem to have a Christian background. See, now I've not attacked you. I'm trying to find out the source of what's going on here. And in many situations, you can get homes where people are not allowed to think, or it's really unsafe to think. You can get a place of business where you might work for an employer who does not allow you to think for yourself. And of course, you're working for somebody, you need to respect them as the employer. You need to respect dad or mother in the family, but at the same time, if we can respect the other person's thoughts, it can go a long way to allowing them to grow, a long way to having them express thoughts in a safe environment where the thoughts can then be molded and shaped. Okay? Rather than putting down those thoughts, and you're working with people whose minds have been put down, then you ask them a question and they begin answering and then they stop. Why? They're afraid of their own thoughts. And you have to tell them, no, it's okay. It's all right. I want to hear what you have to say. What are you thinking? And usually somebody like that will start 3 or 4 sentences and not finish any of them. You ever see this happen? They'll start sentences, but they won't finish their sentences. And what you do, you can do this with yourself. You can do this when you're working with other people. After a while, you say, okay, you just started 3 sentences. Would you please go back and choose one of them and finish it? Okay? And the person's not quite sure what to do because they're not used to expressing their thoughts. But now we're giving them permission. We're encouraging them to express their thoughts by providing an unthreatening atmosphere when they can do that. Okay? And if we'll do that, especially when children are younger, we can start molding and shaping those thoughts. We can allow them to, we can respect their mental approach to things. So we want to encourage people to express the thoughts of their mind without being put down every time. Sometimes it takes a fair amount of shaping, but we do want to encourage the expression of their thoughts. We want to provide a non-threatening atmosphere where we're not putting people down. You should not think thoughts like that. Well, sometimes it gets to the place where we have to say those things, but we want to get there very slowly and gently. Thoughts can be trial balloons. What is a trial balloon? A trial balloon is an idea that somebody has. I think it comes from, I didn't go look into the background. I think it comes from maybe like in the Civil War, they would put up a balloon to see if the enemy would shoot it down. Okay? So a trial balloon in thoughts, you might have a thought and you sort of put the thought up there kind of slowly, you know, like a helium balloon on a string, and you're sort of slowly putting it up. What you're trying to find out is if they're going to shoot it down. So you're working with people, you'll find them putting up these trial balloons. They may say something that's totally bizarre, totally strange, and you're thinking, oh dear, where did that come from? You know, what was the source of that? And many times they're doing it just to see how you're going to react to it. They might say something that's really drastic, or something that's really horrific, or maybe something that's strange in some way, and they're just testing you to find out if you're going to tolerate what they're thinking, what they're saying. So when people put up trial balloons, it doesn't usually help to like shoot it down right away, because now they've discovered you're not safe. So if they put up a trial balloon, you want to say, that's interesting. I wonder what were you thinking about there? So we're trying to draw out what the person's saying. And many times, working with students over the years, and even very recently, a young man was talking about some of his behavior, and his parents just put him down every time. And he was doing inappropriate things. But he was 22 years old. And so then I talked to the parents. Would you talk to my parents? Sure, I'll talk with the parents. So tell me what was happening. Well, the parents say, well, he's doing this. And I said, what did you say? Well, we just told him it's wrong. Well, can you stop him? No. Well, then maybe could we try a different approach? Maybe it is wrong, but could you say, well, what are you thinking? Why do you want to do that? So instead of, as soon as he puts up a thought, that they shoot it down, so to speak, and put him down to the point that he moved out of the house, which means now they have less control over him. I say, is there some way you could find out? Say, what would you be doing that would take you in that direction? Or what are you thinking that would make you want to do those things? So it's encouraging the parents to allow this boy to express his mind, which he didn't know how to do. And in the process, we had to say to him, it's okay to think your own thoughts, because he'll start a couple sentences, not finish them, afraid of his own thoughts. And so we'll say, well, express your thoughts. And then as they express their thoughts, we can start shaping and molding the thoughts. Oh, maybe he is thinking incorrectly, but if we don't ever get that out, it just bottles up in there. And after a while, causes all the kinds of problems that resulted in a broken family. All right, the one physical. This one is the easiest one to talk about because it's the most graphic and the most obvious. So physical touch can be very healing or can be very invasive. This is talking about your body. You need space around your body. And we already heard this in chapel a few weeks ago. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this subject as we get further into our notes here. But physical touch is something that can be very healing or very dangerous and harmful. It can go in both extremes. Okay, so we want to be really, really careful about that. Inappropriate and unwanted physical touch is wrong. If you get into the worldly approach to this, they'll tell you that unwanted physical touch is wrong. But that leaves the impression that wanted physical touch is always right. Is that a biblical way of looking at this? No, it's not. So sometimes we hear something from a worldly perspective and we think, oh, it sounds good, but the truth is it's not. And so in a Christian context, we want to say inappropriate and unwanted physical touch is wrong. And more than wrong, it's sin. So we're going to be very careful that we have a space around our person. And we usually say 18 inches around your person is your personal space. And nobody should be really that much closer to you in a typical relationship. Now, of course, if you're sitting in a bus, there are exceptions to this. If you're in the lunch line, there are people against your shoulders. So we make exceptions in appropriate situations so we don't skits under those situations, okay? But at the same time, if somebody comes, and we'll talk more about this. I know it gets a little humorous sometimes. Well, I'll just make a few examples now. So if you're on a crowded elevator, right, and they're playing this silly elevator music, and I mean, you usually stand straight ahead, or else you read the weight limit on the elevator sign. You don't usually go hi, and look at somebody whose nose is that far from yours. So you get in these situations where we can't help ourselves but be close. Okay, well, in those situations, we usually avoid eye contact because eye contact is very intimate, okay? So you don't want to increase the intimacy because you're already close to this person by making... So I said this one's the easy one to talk about. It's sort of a fun one to talk about. At the same time, it's very important to talk about. Because if somebody invades that personal space, touches your body in wrong ways, even if you're 3 years old and you remember it, and sometimes you don't remember it, but the feelings are there, it is so incredibly harmful. It is just so painful, and it's a long-term, lasting pain that just seems it's very difficult for that to go away. So make sure if somebody's touching you inappropriately, do something about it. Doesn't matter who it is. You just say, excuse me, I don't do that. Excuse me, you have no right to do that. It's not wrong to do that. Sometimes we feel like, well, I can't. I guess they have a right. No, they don't. They do not have a right to be inappropriate physically with you. It doesn't matter who it is. They do not have a right to do that. We make exceptions, obviously, in medical profession. If you're going to have surgery, they're going to see all of you. Okay, and we allow this in certain situations where there's no way out. Okay, and we don't think of those things as violations. But make sure that you are not touching someone inappropriately. Make sure somebody's not touching you inappropriately. On the other hand, if you need a hug and a friend is there to bless you, is that healing? That can be very healing. It can, and many times we could bring healing to other people in that way, and we don't because maybe we're afraid of inappropriate behavior, and we don't ever want to do anything inappropriate. But I think we can tell whether it's something healing or whether it's not. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The spiritual one, spiritual boundary allows sin to displace God in my life. If I'm allowing sin in my life, I'm allowing sin to cross a boundary that belongs to God. Okay? Obsess about sports or business and neglect God and family. I get my mind totally wrapped up in farming or business or whatever, I'm allowing something to cross the spiritual boundary. Assert my will instead of allowing God's will. That crosses the spiritual boundary. Enforce Bible teachings without love. When you enforce Bible teachings without love, you're crossing a spiritual boundary. When you're just saying, look, we say you have to do it this way, and this way, but there's no love in the communication, there's no grace in the communication, you really are causing more harm than you're doing good. Make rules that do not have a biblical basis. Schools have rules, churches have rules, but those rules need to have a biblical basis. We need to be able to say, look, this is the basis. The scripture says modesty, that's what this means. Scripture says integrity, that's what this means. The scripture says obedience, the scripture says forgiveness. We have to base our expectations on biblical bases. If we don't, we're crossing a spiritual boundary. To say that you can't go to heaven unless you drive a gray buggy pulled by a horse, that's crossing a spiritual boundary. Even to imply that is crossing a spiritual boundary, because you cannot document that from the scripture. So we don't want to fault people who do that. That's their decision, but we cannot make those things conditions for salvation. If we do, we're crossing spiritual boundaries. Healthy boundaries and over-dependent extremes is what this author is saying. Too permeable. In other words, like this, too permeable. Your life is so permeable, meaning anybody can sort of run in and out of your life as they want to. Permeable, appropriate, would be this. And impermeable, inappropriate, would be something like this, where you've got not only a boundary, but you also have a wall that will not allow anybody in there. So, the subject. I talk at an intimate level at the first meeting, or maybe within a short time. I'm already talking at intimate levels. That would be very permeable, very much too permeable, much too allowing too many intimate things to happen. Permeable. I do not overwhelm people with personal information. I allow time for trust to develop. You see, when you do that, you're allowing a relationship to grow at a safe rate. Impermeable. I don't ever open up, even to people I know to be trustworthy and caring. So you've got something to hide. You're not going to show anybody what's in your heart, what's in your mind. What this author is saying is that's a little too tight. Okay. Next line, I'm overwhelmed and preoccupied with the person and his or her needs. In other words, if you're too permeable, you're just allowing anything to happen. As soon as somebody starts talking to you, you just get totally overwhelmed. You get totally invested in what they're saying. Permeable or appropriate, I am able to keep relationships in perspective and function effectively in other areas of my life. In other words, you don't get so wrapped up in this relationship that you can't even live. It's only the only thing, you're sort of blinded, and all you can see is this particular relationship, and you get enmeshed or like totally involved with this person so that everything else gets neglected. Inappropriate, I don't let myself even think about another person I'm interested in. Maybe you know there's somebody you should talk about. It doesn't have to be in a romantic type of a situation. Maybe there's somebody you think, well, I really should talk to that person, but you just dismiss it out of your mind. You're not going to allow it to think about that. Inappropriate, too permeable. I can fall in love with a new acquaintance, just like that. Well, that's a little too fast, okay? Appropriate, permeable. I know love is based on respect and trust, and these take time to develop. So you have a relationship, instead of falling head over heels with this person, you just take time and growth and trust and love develop, and eventually that person and you become very close friends. Impermeable is I don't let loving feelings ever develop for anyone. Maybe you've been hurt. Maybe you just want your life totally contained in your own little world, and so you make those walls so tight, and you don't even if you feel these little bit of feelings of love come for somebody, and you just say, nope, you shut it down, you wall it off, you don't allow it to happen. The next line there, too permeable, I let others determine my reality. In other words, You don't have your own definition. You don't have your own respect. You don't have your own shape for your own life. And there's always somebody in here telling you what you should think, what you should do, what you should wear, how you should behave, where you should go, where you shouldn't. Okay? It's just a little too permeable. The appropriate way would be to say, I believe my perceptions are as accurate as anyone else's. So if somebody suggests something that maybe is not appropriate, you don't say, oh, I guess I better go along with that or they won't like me. You say, well, let's think about it this way. Maybe what you're thinking isn't quite right. Maybe we should think about it like that. And realize that God has given you perceptions that are just as good in many cases as the other person's. Impermeable, inappropriate. I'm unwilling to listen to others' perceptions. In other words, if you're living like this and somebody has an idea that comes and they're trying to suggest something to you, it comes right here and stops because you're not about to allow it to enter your thinking process. I let others direct my life. If you're living in boundaries, which are no boundaries like this, that's what will happen. And eventually, when people like that come and talk to me, what I discover is they're kind of lost. They don't know who they are because for years and years, maybe 5 years, maybe 2 years, maybe 40 years, they've been allowing other people to set their life for them. And now they're starting to look back and say, what have I done? I've allowed other people to direct my life. I don't even know who I am anymore. And can be a very frustrating and painful experience. The accurate way would be to say I make decisions for myself based on God's leading and my choices, and also on the suggestions of other people. As we entertain those ideas, God can direct us. Inappropriate, being too impermeable, I refuse to consider the opinions of other people. The next line, I don't ever notice when others invade my personal boundaries. Some people, maybe some of you, have personal boundaries that are so loose that you can't even tell when somebody's in there. You can't tell when somebody's imposing on you because you just allow it to happen all the time. And after a while, you really don't have your own personal identity. And God made you unique. He made you to be you, not to be somebody else. You're the only person who can be what God made you to be. And as I see interaction here at school and I see interaction among people, I see some people have a very, very, very defined personality, and it's very useful. If you notice in the appropriate, permeable approach here, I notice when others try to make decisions for me, are overly helpful, or don't consult me about planning my time. So if you have definition of your life, you recognize when it's happening, but you're still allowing other people to speak to you. You're not rejecting them, but you know when it's happening and when it's not. These people have no idea. Somebody's just telling them what to do, and they're listening, and they're not evaluating. On the other hand, if you get too impermeable, I never allow anyone to help me or give me ideas and suggestions, even when it's helpful and appropriate. So if we've been hurt or if we're trying to protect ourselves and we've gone to this point, then what happens is nothing we hear will ever impact us because we stop it at the borders. We don't ever allow ourselves to interact with it. The last line, I sacrifice my values if I have to in order to be close to other people. It's how this eventually develops. It develops into you sacrificing, well, if I don't go along with this, they won't like me. If I don't go to the movies with them, they won't like me. If I don't watch this DVD with them, or if I don't participate in this kind of behavior that you know is wrong, they won't like me. That means you really have no definition for your life. You should be able to say, no, this is the way I live. I don't live like this. I live like this. And so the appropriate permeable response is, I am not willing to do just anything at all to maintain a relationship. I have biblical values that are not negotiable. These are my values. This is what the Bible teaches me. This is what I've learned. This is what the church, this is what my parents, this is what the scripture, this is what God has shown me. This is how I live. This is the shape of my life. This is the way my life is ordered. Too impermeable, I'm never willing to change anything I do to please anybody. You just get this really defensive approach and you say, Look, this is how I dress, this is how I behave, this is how I talk. Don't be trying to tell me what to do. And you keep everybody at arm's length to keep everybody out of your life. So, what do you think? Yeah, the question is, what about somebody who has unhealthy boundaries over a long period of time? Maybe they've allowed people in their lives too much inappropriate activity. Well, sometimes these people want help and sometimes they don't want help. And if they do want help, then what I try to do is steer them in the direction of looking at the situation biblically, looking at it in the sense of whether what's happened to them, what's been imposed upon them has been biblical and has it been healthy. After a while, things that are wrong can start feeling normal. And then we have to establish some kind of a plumb line for them so they can see, oh, just because this is always the way I was treated or treated in this particular relationship doesn't mean that I have to continue accepting that. Because if we can illustrate that what that person did was harmful, what that person did was inappropriate, what that person did was violating a boundary in your life, what that person did was not biblical, was not godly, then we can help the person see that, oh, maybe I should not be allowing this. How do we go about that? Well, if we're asking that person to change, the person is going to initially say, but I'll feel so mean if I tell this person they can't behave in this particular way with me. I'll feel mean about that. And we have to help them understand that it's not being mean, that you're doing it for your safety and you're doing it also to honor the other person. There is in understanding people the concept of home, okay? We call it home. And people can have a wrong home concept. The home concept is what you live with, what you grow up with, the way you're treated at home, the way you're treated at school, the way you're treated at church. And that is what you're going to think of as normal. That's what you're going to think of as appropriate. That's what you're going to think of as right. Well, what if somebody who has been abused, for example, feels that abuse is normal? Is abuse normal? Is abuse biblical? Is it acceptable? No, but it may feel like home. And getting them out of that can be a long road. Okay. Where we help them to see, no, wait a minute, this was wrong. And just recently, in discussion with a young man, I advised him that he needs to change his relationships. He's in a situation where constantly somebody's imposing wrong things on him. And you know, his mid-20s, at that age, I just told him, you need to get out of there. Probably nothing you can do will change the way you're being treated. So you're at an age when you can leave. Okay. You don't have any choice. And get yourself into a healthy place, a place where you can trust the people, a place where the people will be honest and be a blessing to you, so you can develop a new normal. So you can develop a new home concept. All right, on the last page of the boundaries notes, I think there should be a page called questions and notes. Are you seeing that page there? All right. Let's take a look at that. Questions and notes. Are you rescuing this person, or are you called by God to minister to them? When you talk about boundaries, are you rescuing the person, or are you called by God to minister to them? So we need to think about that. We don't want to be playing rescuer, but if God's bringing you into a situation, maybe God is asking you to minister to this person, to make them stronger, to give them counsel, give them advice. How do you know the difference? How do you know when you're rescuing somebody? Rescuers need what kinds of persons to rescue? Okay, they need victims, people think of themselves as victims, people who are lost, people who are struggling. And so if you find somebody like that and you're the rescuer, you'll become enmeshed with that person. And it'll become an unhealthy relationship. On the other hand, if God's calling you to minister to them, you will get in their life to help them, but you won't get so enmeshed in that life that they cannot be their own person. Are you addicted to fixing everyone, or are you called by God to serve them? you can be addicted to fixing people, and you can sort of live on the high that you get from everybody wanting to talk to you, or you being the answer person, or you being the person to whom they confide. And, people telling you all their dirty laundry, so to speak, can make you feel really important because now you know all the intimacies of their life. But if you really are a person God has called to bring healing, you will not allow that to lure you into people's lives. And that's how we can tell the difference between godly counselors and ungodly counselors. And think about it, not necessarily counseling other people, but think about it in your own life. How are you dealing with other people? Are you a person who needs them to need you? So the illustration that I use is that supposing I'm your counselor, you come to me and I'm trying to help you get better. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to hold your heart. I'm going to do whatever I need to do. It's like I'm teaching you to ride the bicycle. Remember when you teach somebody to ride the bicycle? You hold on to the back of the seat, right? And you run beside them. Do you want to do that for 20 years? The sooner they learn to ride, the better, right? The sooner they learn to ride, the happier everybody is. Same thing with counseling. You only hold on to that bicycle seat and you run beside them. And sometimes you run beside them and look at them and you take your hand off the seat and they don't know it, right? That's not nice, is it? But we do that and we need to do that, right? We're helping this person learn to ride on his or her own. And the same thing is true in working with people. Work with them, be right there, be as close as you need to be in an absolutely appropriate way, but then don't do it forever, okay? You'll destroy them. If I'm the wrong kind of a counselor and I see you starting to get better, I'll panic. The right kind of a counselor, you're getting better, I'm so happy. I'm blessing you. I want you to run, fly on your own. I want you to ride that bike faster than I ever rode any bike, okay? I'll rejoice when you do well. If I'm a good counselor. If I'm not a good counselor and you start going on your own, I'll panic. Why? Now you don't need me. See, I want you to need me to hold on to that bicycle seat, okay? If you don't need me to do that, I'll feel like, oh, I need to be needed and they don't need me anymore, okay? It's really critical. It's very important. So many people get involved in counseling and what they're doing is they need to be needed. And you get involved with them and it will never go away. They'll be chasing you, telling you what's wrong with you. So you need them. Okay. So be careful. Are you addicted to fixing everyone or are you called by God to serve them? Critical questions. Can you require others to accept the responsibility for their lives? In other words, eventually, this person needs to accept the responsibility that you can flip a bicycle and get hurt. I'm not always going to be there holding on to that bicycle seat. And, recently I was talking to someone, and this happens so often, say, well, I was in temptation, or I was about to do something, and God was just there. He sent this person right there to be right there close to me. And I said, okay, good. What about the next time it happens and God doesn't send somebody? Then what? Can you walk straight then? Or do you have to have? And for a time, we have to have somebody helping us learn to ride the bike. But after a while, we have to understand that God's holding us responsible. So can you require others to accept the responsibility? Can you require people who are living like this to live like this? Can you require people who are living like this to live like this? It's a little hard to do that. It's difficult for us to do that. Do you need to be needed, or are people dumping and discarding you? If you're a person who needs to be needed, people just come to you when they need somebody to unload the truck on, and then after that, they go away. Real love is reflective, but also directive. I tell people when you're working with someone, think of yourself as having a I'm using a book here, but I usually have a nice big piece of plywood, and think about when they talk to you that they're throwing a tennis ball at you. So throwing a tennis ball, the sentence they just said is like a tennis ball coming toward you. What you do is bounce it back to them. Okay. If they throw it high, you might have to jump. If they throw it on the floor, you might have to do like we do in volleyball, right? Hit the ground and get that thing up off the ground. And people will throw the ball all different ways. What we're doing is being reflective. In other words, as someone talks to us, they put up this trial balloon and we say, oh, do I hear you saying that? So this is what happened. Okay. You're reflecting back to them to require them to think about what they were saying and think about what they were doing. And then you also get directive. You start saying, well, but did you think about it this way? Why don't we think about it this way? The way that person behaved towards you, or the way this person talked to you, maybe we should think about what that really was. So real love is reflective. It listens. It's also directive. It requires responsibility on their part. Boundaries are not walls. Walls are created to keep people away. Boundaries are to provide honor and respect for yourself and for others. Boundaries give structure and identity to life by defining the borders of your life. And I always put this little statement in here. Parents have the right to know personal information about underage children. I am not talking about the way the world is doing this today. My wife took a course from a secular university, and the teacher was saying that children have a right to have their own bedroom. The parents don't go in there. And they can have whatever they want in there. They can have a television in there. They can have whatever magazines they want in there. And my wife wrote back, it was a distance course. Lois wrote back telling, well, we don't believe that's a very good way to raise children. And this professor got really upset about it. Well, but you have to let this person identify who they are and become the person they want to be. No, that's not biblical. Parents have the right to know, and really the responsibility to know, what's going on with personal information about underage children. And of course, sometimes in schools, teachers sometimes need to know information about students. As a school teacher for many years, as an administrator, I keep an eye on who's doing what. I want to know who's doing what. Why? So I can be nosy in people's information? No. To protect people. Do I know that somebody is thinking maybe about harming themselves? Do I know somebody's thinking about harming somebody else? Do I know somebody is thinking about doing something harmful to the school? I took that very seriously, and I still do. I will take steps to make sure those things don't happen. And if that involves an invasion of privacy, then it may have to be that way. Okay? So other authority situations need to be handled with absolute care. Every person is fragile. We're fragile people, and we need to be handled with care. On the other hand, we also need to be handled with enough guidance and direction to bring integrity into every situation. How did Jesus deal with people? Lois and I were driving along one day, and I said, let's talk about how Jesus dealt with people and how there were contrasts. And so we wrote these things down. And I'm sure you could make a longer list. I'm sure there's things we missed. He accepted the sinner, but he never tolerated sin. He was caring without being controlling. He was forgiving without being permissive. He was accepting without being manipulative. He was common, but not condescending. He was truthful, but not invasive. How can you live this way? This is like walking the top of a knife edge, isn't it? Can we really live this way? This is what Jesus did. He's our example. And talking about boundaries, that's what we need to do. We need to try to do exactly what he did. Can we? No, but we can work at it, okay? We can be as close to Jesus as possible. He was honest, but not flattering. He was wise, but not clever. He was holy, but he did not isolate himself. He was righteous, but not self-righteous. He was firm without being harsh. He was loving without being mushy. He took risks, but was not risque. Risque is a word that means doing things that are indecent. So he took a risk by talking to the woman at the well. Was he indecent? No. He took a risk in that she could have rejected him. But he did not do something inappropriate. He was insightful but not depreciating. sensitive but not sentimental, persistent but not pushy, confident but not arrogant, humble but not hesitant, compassionate but not compromising. That's how we should try to live.